and this is Miniature Dragon Comic Review. And Doc is once again out and about, Doc not found, and we have Woody Arnold, and we're going to review God Country.
Yeah. Um,
So, Woody, if you would like to tell a little bit about God Country.
God Country is a graphic novel that came out last year, I believe, or may have finished at the start of the year. I've actually kind of lost track, so it's bad on me. But it was an interesting miniseries that had come out from Image Comics that had this premise where it deals with a family suffering with a father who has Alzheimer's, and the guy is just, as usual with these cases, he's becoming a problem. He's difficult to handle. The local sheriff wants to have him committed because he's being a nuisance. And the son is just beside himself. He doesn't know what to do with this thing because his dad is this wonderful man, and his wife has never known him any other way. So she wants to take their kid and leave. And at the beginning of the story, this tornado, a storm like nobody's ever seen, comes through Texas and drops a magic sword. And the father, who has Alzheimer's, is drawn to the sword, and when he picks it up, it completely cures the condition. And he's cured as long as he has the weapon in hand. But it has a catch in that the gods who had the sword before him want their stuff back. So this family is in for a bit of trouble. And that's essentially the setup at the start of the series.
And today we're reviewing 1 through 6, which is the comic run.
Yeah, the entire graphic novel. It was a one and done. A complete graphic novel that was created as just one complete story, and then that's it. And I really like it because you have a complete story, and it isn't going to drag on for a while.
Yeah, going through it, it was quite interesting. I thought the sword design was quite an interesting part of being a. This is a mythical blade. This is a divine blade. This sword onto itself is a god. And
the god of swords.
The god of swords.
Mm-hmm.
And what we mean by that is within the story, it actually it's a talking blade, and it actually represents other blades through mythology. Like Excalibur is powered by it, and even mundane blades become empowered by this sword.
Kind of like how in mythology, like warriors would worship a god of war, right? Well, all swords are considered to be worshippers of this sword, and its presence is felt across every battlefield across the universe. Is the idea. And yeah.
The mythology is quite interesting. The take of how the gods that are within the story, there's 3 of them, and I feel it's really interesting because it's like I can see mythos from like different types of cultures kind of blended together to make like a new story. And I think that was a really interesting aspect of like you have an old father, you have a death god, and you have a very much like a god of war.
Well, what I find interesting about it is that it kind of there's a lot you can read into it, where it's a mythology of gods that also, as you said, is built upon elements that we know, but it also doesn't preclude them. Like these are not the gods of Earth; these are a different pantheon of gods, but they're, like the idea being that there's other gods throughout the universe, but they're not supreme, and the gods in this mythology are not eternal, and they're not immortal, and they can be killed. And they also, what I find interesting is that gods typically are portrayed as being having like certain personality traits or purposes associated with their existence, and these gods are very much the same thing, where they are bound by their purpose and they cannot break that purpose. And the Allfather is so blinded by his feelings of his superiority that he literally will destroy himself to be right. Like he cannot conceive that he would be fallible, and I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, character design and the individuals within this comic book series, I thought it was really well written. Like, it was
Mm-hmm.
well put together. All the characters felt like, um, you had enough focus on them to get a feeling of who they were.
Well, it's one of those books where the author had a very specific vision for what he wanted. He had a specific story in mind, and it was only 6 issues, right? So he could tell everything he needed in that time. The characters really um, well put together, were well presented, and everything that you needed to tell that story was there. And you didn't have a situation where the story where you're going to be like, okay, we're going 50 or 100 issues or 80 issues, and we have to fill that space. And and so it's one of those deals where like there's no filler, there's no wasted space or wasted time. It's like it's exactly the story that needed to be told.
And I think even with this story, it has some flashbacks, but it feels like it's very um, like its purpose is to get you get you to know what previously happened. Like,
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
regulations. This isn't like several pages that are going, back during this time period. Let's do some filler and, like, get you
Yeah.
what's going on. This starts towards the end of these characters' lives, but at the same time, it does read with the narrator like, this is a story handed down from the
Yeah.
generations that survived the aftermath of
like
what happened.
I think it was told because like the main family in the story, that there's a daughter, right, or in this case a grandfather or a granddaughter to to the guy with the sword. But I think it was like her grandchildren that were telling the story. And it's also interesting. It's kind of timeless. Like, it doesn't say when it takes place, and you look at it, and this is a story that could have been told, in the 1950s. Like, it's kind of a timeless story, and it doesn't matter when it took place. Because
Yeah,
like
there was
yeah.
enough of, like, as technology and also the way that the art style and everything that was going
Mm.
on, of I could see it very contemporary for certain parts of Texas where it could have been within the present year that it was, written and published in. But I could also see your statement about, like, the 1950s. It really does
Mm.
feel
Yeah.
like it could be within that kind of expand.
Yeah, because there's nothing about hairstyles or clothing that is the only thing unusual is the sheriff's a black guy, so that kind of dates it a little bit. Like, you probably wouldn't have a black sheriff in the 1950s, even in Texas.
Mm.
But like, I don't think they're specific about what war that the grandfather fought in. It's just kind of like, he's just he actually kind of reminds me of Luke's grandfather, that he talks about, because this guy is like is just this old badass, right? That's just tough as nails and can back it up, and the sword just takes whatever the guy has and just takes it to a whole new level. But Luke was talking about his grandfather one time, and this friend of ours, and the guy had been rear-ended by somebody, and the grandfather just kind of lost it for a second, gets out of the car, storms out to the car, picks it up off the ground, and then drops it, and then kind of comes to his senses, and then gets back in the car and drives away. And you
Wow.
can imagine how scared those people must have been when to have some. And this guy's probably, I think he's like 6'6" or something in his prime. I mean, nowadays, who knows? He's kind of old. And I never met the gentleman. I just, like, Luke had just told me the story with great awe and reverence. But it's just this whole, like, this is the kind of guy that this grandfather was, except that he's very kind, but he will get in there and he'll back it up if he has to.
Yeah, and I think your statement about, without going into details of, like, that this is definitely the 80s, this is definitely,
Mm-hmm.
2010, this is definitely, 2018, or, whatever particulars.
Yeah.
It just keeps it enough of like the story of what's currently unfolding is the more important part.
There's another aspect of it too. Like when this first came out, I had reconnected with a friend. It was the first issue came out probably about 3 or 4 months after we connected with this friend. And this friend that of course, we won't mention him for privacy's sake, but he was dealing with a family member who's going through Alzheimer's, and I had recommended that he should read the book. I don't know if he did, but I kind of reading through this for me, this kind of reads like the author might have had a personal connection to the story, that this might have been kind of like a way of getting release for what he may have gone through or experienced at some point. Because like I know a lot of writers have done that, where they have this tragic event in their life or some difficult experience, and then they create a story which is based upon that experience, and it's kind of like their way of dealing with it, kind of like when Eric Clapton wrote that song about his son when his son died. And I have not had the opportunity to verify that theory, but it kind of reads like somebody who has a very personal connection and experience that they're drawing from.
Yeah. Let's see. Going over the comic book itself.
Yeah.
As art, I would have to say it's like this is a very favorable book. The style that is used, it has a very kind of gritty level to it, but really refined in a lot of other areas that just really enhance it. A very painterly kind of look that
are you
almost
able to look up the name of the artist?
Not at the moment. I'm unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not able to either.
Yeah.
But
it does remind me style-wise of a series that I really like of Black Science. There's certain elements of like how it's illustrated that reminds me of that series.
Well, it's a little bit rough around the edges, but yet technically perfect. This is one of those cases where I think like it feels like it's perfectly chosen art, because it kind of like reflects the chaos going on in the lives of these people.
Right. And I think it gets a lot of dynamics from the kind of rough, almost sketchbook kind of feel in some aspects. Whereas if it was a little bit more smooth or polished, it would kind of come out a little bit more bland.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely not a book where you want the Marvel style or the DC style of art. It definitely needs to be kind of rough around the edges. Because like we're dealing with a very chaotic, very rough situation. Like, this is not a book where I want to talk too much about what ultimately happens, but like the gods themselves are prepared to go to any lengths necessary to get what they want. And
in the majority of it is the All-Father.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
The All-Father becomes becomes an antagonist within it, but
he's the straight up villain, man.
He's the straight up villain, but I want to say his son, the Son of War, he's a really interesting character. I like the way that he was. I mean, his motivation, what he was willing to do, and how his story arc goes with dealing with, this sword that chose a mortal opposed to the gods.
Well, he was an interesting character because he comes off like when you first meet him, you're like, okay, we're stuff's gonna go down here, and then the sword speaks up and says, "Whoa, dude, check yourself," basically, and then the war god's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and then he goes off and just has a conversation with the grandfather, and it's just like he's treating the grandfather like an equal at that point. And you basically find out that he doesn't want to do this. But he cannot stand against his father. And it's very interesting that like you have the god of death, you have the god of war, you have the All-Father and the sword god. And the sword god's like, screw you all, I am out of here. And possibly because I suspect that the sword probably bailed because it did not want to go down with the family when everything finally failed, and you basically see the story where they bring their own ruin upon themselves, and they didn't have to, and it was strictly pride. And it's fascinating to me that this god of war either will not or cannot stand against his father, and all he had to do was say no, and everything would have turned out okay. But he doesn't, and he can't, and it's so interesting. Like, they get these characters so trapped in their role and their identity that they cannot be anything but, and like they are gods and they don't have free will. We are mortals and we have free will. We just don't have their power.
Right.
And the gods think that they're better than us.
Yeah.
But are they? You know?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely something that I have to say, for the people that are listening to this, like, definitely check this book out.
Yeah.
I feel like you're going to definitely enjoy it. As going from story, lettering, the lettering was good. I definitely felt like there wasn't any parts where, somebody's speech bubble, meshed up with somebody else's, or the narrator's was easy to follow. There wasn't any kind of that, like, okay, I missed something kind of feel.
Nothing really jumped out at me. Like, it was one of those cases where, it felt very seamless. It's kind of like that comment that Claire made, where I kind of ruined, like, after teaching her how to be a letterer, I ruined her on comics. Where she keeps looking at the books and it's like, oh, I see how they did that. God damn it. But I felt that, like, just from that technical standpoint, I thought everything was very well executed and very seamless.
Yeah. Nothing too, like, extraordinary of, like, something new out of the box, but at the same time, there wasn't any flaw. There wasn't anything that was like, wow, can't read this, can't understand who's doing what. So lettering, definitely, it's like, that was another strong point that they got.
Yeah.
And
I love the color choices in this book too, because there's nothing about this book that screams superheroes. Like, all of the colors are very subtle choices.
Well, it reminds me of
colors.
Like watercolor. I mean, a lot of the aspects feel like somebody went in and probably digital coloring, but somebody that knows watercoloring.
Yeah,
because it feels like for the people that are watching our review, you can see some of the various pages and whatnot, and a lot of them have just kind of a watercolor or like a Copic kind of feel, something very organic.
Well, even Copic it feels too. Our colors are kind of flashy. Like this color, the color choices are very specific to the setting, because a lot of the scenes are very dark and there's like a gloomy mood, and even the bright sunny day that they had at one point still felt it didn't feel full of life, and I think that's interesting, because you have a story where most of the characters are at the end of their life, and this book has a really hopeful and very bright ending, but there is a certain mood and a tone to it, and the colors set that tone perfectly.
And that is definitely a sign of a really good book, of, like, getting that kind of psychological part to add into of what's going on. You can see like during the combat where energy's coming off of it, and it illuminates the area, and you'll get like bright spots within the darkness, and it feels like everything was very purposely done.
Yeah.
And it's like even the shadows and the highlights just feel like they're enhanced.
Well, one thing I want to say about this book, which I found very compelling, is that at the end of the day, right, most of us are going to be burying our parents, right? And we will have to deal with loved ones and family members who die before we do, or or have like some sort of a terrible terminal illness, or it's like sometimes when people die, it just doesn't seem fair, right? And in my life, I've already had a few close calls with that, where people I knew almost died, or whatever, and it's just like this is an interesting thing for somebody that, like, if you're going through that situation, this could be something that you can relate to and possibly find that, like, it helps a little bit. I mean, it's like at a lot of people, some people, when they're ready to go, they're ready to go, and but for a lot of us, it's like they don't want to die. They don't feel that they're not done, and they just want 5 more minutes that they're not going to get. And that is kind of at the core of what's like the entire conflict of this story, is the fact that a lot of these characters just don't want to die, and they are desperately clinging on to their lives. And that is a very relatable sentiment.
No, very, very agreeable on that point. And I guess the following thing, since we've done art, kind of a slash story, and lettering,
Sure.
and colors, I guess the only other thing that comes up is bordering that level of spoilers, or talking about like any additional elements of story.
Well, this is one of those ones where you don't want to spoil the ending. And I've kind of been dancing around it. And there's a lot of elements that happen in the story. But it's also an interesting one too. It's like there's only 7. There's actually only 8 characters in the entire story, like, that have speaking parts, if I remember right. And
well, let's see. It's
only 7 of them are main characters. Like, it's like not all of them are like you meet the sheriff. You've got the grandfather. You've got the 3 gods. See, a sheriff, grandfather. There's 3 gods. There's the sword gods. Maybe I counted wrong. And then there's the son, his wife, and his daughter. So you've got 9 characters in the book. And like, I would say that the sword, the grandfather, and then the grandfather's family, those are like the 5 main characters. Those are the ones that get the most play. Everybody else is supporting characters, But yeah, this is a very tight story.
Yeah, it definitely does not do any unnecessary deviations. And like, even once again, like flashback wise, I feel like it has enough of a purpose to kind of go like, these are people regaling you of what happened, and purposely, like, we started at this point within the story, and within a couple of issues, because it's only that 6 issue arc, it gives you enough information of what's going on to give you those tidbits of like, okay, this is part of the history of the sword. You get like these different aspects of the grandfather, like part of his interactions with how he turned into the person that he became at the beginning of the story, and also a little bit about how he was before before he got Alzheimer's. And it's just like, it's a great part of the story, like, that really you need to read the full series to get like this just really beautiful splash page, this two-part splash page that is a great, not exactly flashback, but it's still kind of a flashback.
You know what the thing that I like?
What's that?
So I make comic books, as I'm sure anybody watching the show should know by now. And one of the things that I have a dislike of is the superhero body type, right? you know, it wasn't that bad until Jim Lee came on the scene, and suddenly everybody had to be building these, you know, these huge, except for Superman. You know, it's like so. But when he came when he became popular, everybody was built like Superman. You know, and before that didn't happen as much, even though there was still the superhero body type. And like, I really like that the people in the story are just regular people. Like the grandfather
has a beer gut,
but oh yeah, man, the guy's really out of shape. And the son is definitely just a regular guy. It's like there's nobody in the story that's built like a superhero.
The only one that comes close is the God of War, and I love the fact that the All-Father and the Death God don't have that superhero
physique
body type.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, but the Death God also doesn't have the superhero body type. He's simply he's built like somebody that works out all the time, and he's proportionately large for his height. You know, because the guy's like what, you know, 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall, or something.
Right.
But it's like he's no more muscular than a WWE wrestler, or a power lifter. You know, like he's physically, you know, if he was the size of a human, he would look like somebody that works out all the time.
Right.
And I love that. He's not built like a He-Man action figure.
Yeah. Now, we've got 4 minutes to go, so wrapping on up and all that good stuff. Well, so, your final thoughts?
Well, there's it's just a great book. I mean, you gotta check this book out. I can't recommend it more highly. And it's one that I could see myself going back to read again. And I just realized, like, we never actually talked about the sword design itself, and it had a really interesting style that, like I found it really interesting that the sword was built, but none of the pieces actually touch each other. I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, no, this is definitely a 5 out of 5 book for me.
Yeah, my recommendation is definitely pick this book up for yourself. And with 6 issues, you know, it's not too bad. I mean, especially now that it's a graphic novel.
Yeah,
definitely recommend this. This is,
and the whole thing's out. You can read the whole story.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is definitely like at the kind of level for me for the same as Birthright and Saga.
Mm-hmm. So you sure you're not giving it a review of a ruined sword and a death god and a failing empire?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
So now that we have a few minutes since we did that, anything that you would like to plug, Woody?
Well, you know, we have a new page for Cyber Symbiosis coming out. What's today? Sunday. Coming out on it should be out on Tuesday. So check that out. Conwaytheseries.com, and we are currently coloring the pages for Chapter 2 of Countermeasure. So we've got cool stuff coming out, more content, and then we should be well, hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have firmed up a convention schedule for the rest of the year. You know, we're going to be at more shows, so hopefully we can meet some more new fans and tell people about what we're doing in person.
Very cool on that. So definitely check us out on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, all that sociopathic media stuff.
Well, if you search for Cyber Symbiosis, you pretty much find us with no problem. You know, since nobody else uses that word.
And the only thing that I'd like to plug is once again with my Comic Kyujin YouTube channel, just released another video, so definitely check that out. And I think with that, we're at time for a change. So we're going to sign off and let you guys be nerdy out there. Have fun.
See you next episode.
Bye.